Well, hello and a warm welcome to you all. And thank you for participating in this education session that's entitled How Well Do You Know Dementia for the Seniors Showcase. My name is Sarah Cook, and I'm the Education Program Supervisor at the Alzheimer's Society of Peterborough, Kawartha Lakes, Northumberland, and Haliburton. And I'm really pleased to share with you some important information about dementia and the impact that it can have on those that are living with dementia and also those that are caring for someone with dementia. So while awareness about dementia has certainly increased over the last several years, stigma and negative attitudes around it continue to persist in our society today. And so this presentation is really designed to help you test out your knowledge about dementia and to find out how we can all work together to reduce the stigma and to better respond to the realities of the disease. So during this session, we're going to take a look at some of the most common questions that we get asked at the Alzheimer's Society when people have questions about dementia. So I encourage you to grab a pen and a piece of paper as we get started. And I want you to consider how you would go about answering some of the questions that we're going to pose to you. Please feel free to keep score for yourself along the way. And really, this is all about enhancing your learning as we examine some of the most common myths and realities of dementia. So we hope you'll have fun with this little quiz. Don't take it too seriously, just have fun with this. So we're going to start off by asking the most common question that we get asked at the Alzheimer's Society. Oh my goodness, if we took a poll of how many times we've been asked this question, I know the number would be extremely high. But the question is, what is the difference between Alzheimer's disease and dementia? And we hear those two terms sometimes used interchangeably, but that seems to be a very common question. And maybe you're thinking the same thing. You're wondering what the difference is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some time over the next, 2 or 3 slides, and we're going to look at these two terms individually so that we can understand what it is meant to have Alzheimer's disease and what it is meant to have dementia. So we'll look at these individually. So here, as you can see on the slide, on the left side of the screen, there's a little infographic, and hopefully you can see that it's in the shape of an umbrella. And one of the most important things that you can understand about the term dementia is that it is an umbrella term. And it's an umbrella term that describes the symptoms that can happen when somebody has either a disease or a disorder of some kind in their brain. And kind of where the clarification comes in is that the most common disease that we see impacting how the brain functions is Alzheimer's disease. So in actual fact, Alzheimer's disease is the most common form or the most common type of dementia. I'm going to take this a little bit further and explain a little bit more. So as I said, dementia is that umbrella term that takes into account a whole set of symptoms that can happen when there's that damage to the brain. So many of you may be aware that it could include that loss of memory, which we commonly know that generally dementia has an impact on memory. It also has an impact on a person's ability to understand and to use proper judgment and decision-making abilities. So there's other symptoms as well that come under that umbrella of dementia. So just to go even one step further, I think you would be surprised to find out, just how prevalent dementia is. When we look at that term or that big umbrella, we can actually go a step further and break that umbrella into 2 different halves because there's 2 main categories of dementia. So as you can see on the screen, on the left side of the screen, we have the category that we refer to as reversible causes of dementia. And maybe you didn't know that there are certain conditions that can exist that can cause the symptoms of dementia, right? Like we just talked about, the loss of memory, the loss of understanding or reasoning abilities. They can be reversible, meaning if these conditions are detected, properly addressed and acknowledged by a healthcare provider, for example, and then treated appropriately, you'll often see those symptoms disappear or reverse. And so, as you can see here, a person can experience dementia symptoms because of side effects from medications or a medication interaction. They can experience symptoms of dementia from a nutritional deficiency or even severe dehydration that tends to happen more in seniors. We see vitamin deficiencies and dehydration happening in seniors. Metabolic disorders. So, an undiagnosed thyroid disorder can often appear as though it's mimicking the symptoms of dementia. Depression and delirium, those conditions, and also sleep disorders. So, all of those conditions can cause those symptoms. But as I said, if they're properly addressed and treated, you'll often see those symptoms go away. So, it is really key that we connect with our healthcare provider if we notice any of the symptoms. And we're going to talk about those coming up. Now, on the other side of that umbrella, unfortunately, on the right side of the umbrella, we have the category that we refer to as irreversible causes of dementia. And, unfortunately, these are the diseases that do impact the brain. And at this time, we really don't have a cure or a true ability to treat these diseases effectively to stop them from increasing. So, we have Alzheimer's disease, as I mentioned, is the most common form. But we also have conditions like Lewy body dementia. Maybe you've heard that term before. Vascular dementia, which is probably second most common to Alzheimer's disease. Frontotemporal dementia, and then, of course, it's possible to have mixed dementias as well. So dementia, when we think of that term, in the past, it's often used as the name of a specific disease or a specific diagnosis. But as you can see from this diagram, there's a lot more to it than that. And there's a lot of different types that a person may experience. So that's key to know. And that Alzheimer's disease is just one form. Okay, well, let's go on to our second question. So you can score yourself on question number 1 there. Let's move on to the second question. Okay, now I know this is probably asking a lot of you to pull a number out of your head, but how many Canadians do you think are currently living with dementia? And the reason I ask this question is, do you actually have an idea in mind? Can you form a number based on what you know about dementia? And in most cases, I think the answer is quite startling for some folks, because we don't always realize how far-reaching and how prevalent dementia can be. So if you've got the number in your head, even an estimate can be really helpful. But let's look at the numbers right now in Canada. So currently, 564,000 Canadians are living with some form of dementia. That's a pretty startling number. When you think about it, that's a pretty high number. What's even more challenging to think about is that if we don't find a cure, they're projecting that within the next 15 years, that number is going to reach 937,000 Canadians. So we're getting close to the million mark there of Canadians that will be living with some form of dementia. What you need to understand from that is that does not include all of the individuals that are impacted by that diagnosis. So I want you to think for a moment about the family members and the spouses and the care providers, the volunteers that work with folks that are living with dementia, their neighbors and friendship groups. There are so many people that are impacted by that single diagnosis. It translates to about 25,000 new cases of dementia that are being diagnosed each year. But when I really look at the impact, the infographic on the left side of the screen really, really stands out, because This all translates to a ratio of about 1 in 11 Canadians that are currently living with dementia. And that number is staggering. So maybe that surprised you a little bit, or maybe you were right on with how you were determining, just how far reaching these numbers are. But 1 in 11 Canadians, that's a very challenging statistic for us to deal with. And that is why we're working so hard for research into a cause and cure. All right, well, let's move on. Let's move on to our third question in our little quiz. Is memory loss always the first warning sign of dementia? Oh, think about that one for a moment. So, when we think about dementia, we think about Alzheimer's disease. Does memory loss come to mind for you as a symptom? For most people, it does. But what's important to realize is that while memory loss may be a common symptom in Alzheimer's disease and in other forms of dementia too, sometimes it isn't the first sign that people may recognize. And, that there are other signs that could appear. So a person could experience changes in mood, changes in their behavior, their judgment, their understanding, even in their communication. Those changes may appear long before memory loss ever does. And so I've heard that some folks, have discounted, oh, well, I don't have memory loss, or the person that I'm caring for doesn't have memory loss, so it can't be dementia. And we say, you know what, it's really important to know what the other signs can be. And so I wanted just to take a few moments with you to look at the 10 warning signs of Alzheimer's disease. And I'm not going to go into these too in depth, just in the interest of time today, but I did want to let you know that there are other symptoms that we need to be aware of to look for either in ourselves or maybe somebody that we care about that, could signal that we should be talking to a healthcare provider if we're noticing several of these symptoms. And what I want to start out by saying is that these are in no particular order. Okay? They don't follow a particular order, but it's possible that somebody could experience some of these signs. Sometimes they may not. But generally what we say is that it may not be a cause for concern if a person identifies with 1 or 2 symptoms, but if they're seeing several, 4 or 5 or more, it might be a good idea to mention that to a healthcare provider. Just, talk with them about some of the things that you're experiencing. So that first one up there, I know it's labeled number 1. It is the first one that comes to mind. It's that memory loss. But what's important to recognize here is that it's not that normal, what we would often refer to as age-related forgetfulness that some of us have from time to time. I know I do sometimes, or if you're really particularly stressed, you might be more forgetful. What we're talking about here as being a potential warning sign is that a person loses short-term memory. In Alzheimer's disease in particular, they lose that short-term memory and it persists over time. So it worsens over time. And that memory loss can actually affect their day-to-day abilities. So it may be normal to forget, a phone number that a friend gives to you, or, somebody tells you to come pick them up at their house and they give you their address and you think you're going to remember and it disappears from your memory. That's quite normal for that to happen. But what may be a cause for concern is if the person isn't remembering to take important medication, if they're not remembering to eat, important meals, and they're forgetting a lot of appointments that go on to impact their health and well-being. Those may be things that could be concerning. So we need to be careful about that. Difficulty performing familiar tasks is another sign, that the person may have always been really good at putting a meal together. Maybe they never had to use that recipe because they had it up here in their memory. And all of a sudden, they're starting to really rely on that. And even following the recipe may be difficult. Or maybe there's the gentleman that is really always so diligent about changing the oil in the car or rotating the tires, even finding a harder time with those kinds of tasks. That could be a sign as well, especially if they've always been really good at doing that. Problems with language. So, you know, many people aren't aware that something like Alzheimer's disease or another form of dementia can impact language abilities, but often that is an early sign. If the person is forgetting simple words or forgetting how to use that language, maybe they're telling you a story or explaining something, and all of a sudden, the meaning behind what they're telling you is starting to lose its purpose. It's not making sense, or they've substituted a word now, and that story no longer makes sense. So they may be more vague with their language. They may be saying things like, "I need the what do you call that thing that for the television?" And you're trying to supply the answer that it's the remote control. So they might be looking for that kind of information because they've forgotten that vocabulary. Disorientation to both time and space can also be a sign, an early warning sign. And the person can become disoriented, maybe on their way home from the grocery store or on their way home from work. They may not know how to get home from where they are. We even see some folks that are getting lost in, if it's a newer home that they've moved into, maybe even finding their way to the washroom could be difficult for them. So they're becoming disoriented in terms of space. But a person can also be disoriented in terms of time. And I know many of us during the pandemic, we sometimes our days they blend together. We might think, is it Tuesday today or Wednesday today? What's the the number of the day? Is it the 12th or the 13th? Most of us, though, know that it's 2021, that it's May, or we know the season, and we can orient ourselves that way and try to figure it out. Sometimes a person with dementia may not even know the year. They may think it's much earlier. So maybe it's 1979, they believe that that's the year. They may not be aware of the time of day or the season. So they can become very disoriented in that respect. Impaired judgment. So a person may have a very difficult time judging what is safe or unsafe in a situation. So, for example, let's think, I know it's the time of year that we're not really thinking about winter time, but imagine a person goes out on a very cold winter day, and the temperature is, minus 20, and they're heading out in just a very light pair of pajamas and maybe nothing on their feet or a pair of slippers. They're not able to judge what is appropriate attire for the weather. And so this can really impact their safety and their well-being. Sometimes people will comment to me, "Oh, my spouse is doing things like that normally they wouldn't do, like taking food off of someone else's plate, or doing something that they consider, for lack of a better word, inappropriate." And that may indicate that judgment is impaired. Problems with abstract thinking is another symptom that a person could experience. And this tends to happen when the person is trying to manage their finances or balance their checkbook or issue a bill payment. They might get the numbers and the symbols mixed up. And this is particularly distressing for individuals that have always been really on top of managing those finances, but they're finding it harder and harder to make sense of that information. So they may write $5,000 on a check for a payment when really the bill is only $50. So they could be overpaying or underpaying as a result of that. And that can be troubling too. Misplacing things. So, from time to time when we're busy or we're in a rush, we may set down our car keys or our cell phone if we've got an armload of groceries or whatever we might be doing. And, then we having to backtrack and try to, retrace our steps and find out where we put that object. But most of the time when we're misplacing things, it's because we're not putting things back in the spot where they normally live or they normally reside. This is a little bit different as a warning sign for dementia. I often tell people to think of it like, if a person is putting familiar objects in inappropriate places, or in other words, places where they really don't belong, where it doesn't make sense for them to go. So, opening up your fridge and finding an article of clothing inside, that could be a warning sign. We often use a couple of other examples. So, your wristwatch in the sugar bowl, or an iron in the freezer. Those are a couple of examples of what we're talking about when we're referring to misplacing things. Now, changes in mood and behavior and changes in personality often go hand in hand as symptoms. And a person could experience rapid mood shifts, from calm to tears to anger in a matter of moments for what appears as there's really no apparent reason for that. Or they might be overly tearful and not be able to explain why. So those shifts in mood and behavior, and also the change in personality, can become quite apparent. So maybe the person's becoming very suspicious or paranoid all of a sudden. Maybe they feel like things have been taken from them because they've forgotten where they put their money, or a personal belonging. Even the most social person who has largely been involved in their friendship or social groups, maybe with their church groups, a book club, whatever it might be, you may notice that person's starting to withdraw, or become more introverted, and that is a change in personality as well. And then finally, the last sign there is loss of initiative. And so, it's normal from time to time for a person to kind of lose our get up and go. We lose our energy or our drive to participate in an activity. But, maybe the next week we're feeling up to it and we're ready to resume and go about that activity. A person with dementia may need constant prompting to stay involved in activities. And it's because they're losing that initiative, they're losing that drive, or that initiation to perform that particular task or activity. So it's important that we understand that it's not just about memory loss, that there are other signs as well. And hopefully that information has been helpful to highlight some of the key things that we could be looking for if we are perhaps concerned about ourselves maybe, or somebody that we love or that we know. I'm going to move us back to our quiz. So I'm going to ask you question number 4. Can a person living with dementia continue to enjoy social activities? So there's a question, because this one I do get asked a lot from caregivers in particular, or family members. They'll say, can they really continue to do the things that they've always enjoyed doing, like going on the, coffee outing with their friends, or being active in their church or in their book club? So in answer to this question, I really hope that you answered that as a yes, because we want everyone to know that people that are living with dementia can continue to take part in activities that they enjoy, and we really want them to stay involved in those activities so that they can keep their brains as healthy and active for as long as possible. So that's key. We know that a strong social network, those contacts and interactions with others, can really help to prolong their independence and support good cognitive health for as long as possible. So it's key for people to stay involved. It's kind of like that old saying, if you don't use it, you lose it. So if you're not using, your communication skills, or you're not interacting with others, sometimes that does affect our cognitive health. So that's really key, that they stay involved. Okay, I'm checking in here at question number 5. I hope you're doing well with your quiz so far. And the 5th question is, are there treatments that stop dementia from getting worse? So this is another common question that people ask. Are there medications? Are there treatment options that will stop dementia from progressing further? So think about what you know. What have you heard? What is the research that you're aware of been telling you to help you answer this question? So it can be a little bit confusing at some times. And that's because, there are medications that can help to treat or reduce some of the symptoms. And they do work in some people. Some people really show benefits from the use of those medications, but no treatment option right now will stop the progression of dementia. And that's important for people to understand. Sometimes they feel that, oh, if I'm taking a medication, that's going to cure my Alzheimer's disease. And we don't want to be misleading. While the medications can certainly help to reduce, some of that memory loss, or they act as cognitive enhancing drugs. And that's very beneficial. And we're so pleased to be able to offer that to those that are experiencing the symptoms. We do want to be very transparent and let people know that this is not a cure. So that's key. Okay, number 6. Now this is a really interesting question. Is Alzheimer's disease more prevalent in men or in women? What do you think about this? Do we see Alzheimer's disease more in men or in women? I'll tell you, I have been with the Alzheimer's Society for about 18 years. And when I first started at the Alzheimer's Society, we used to look at our clients, the people that we served, and the statistics that is that we saw many men that were living with Alzheimer's disease. And then a few years later, it became kind of men and women were almost neck and neck. It was about the same, roughly the same in terms of prevalence. However, we now recognize that women make up 65% of Canadians with Alzheimer's disease. So we are seeing it seems to be the majority of those living with it are women. And I'm sure you have all kinds of questions about why that might be. And unfortunately, the research doesn't tell us one way or the other. There's no true factors that really stand out as a cause for this. But I do want to let you know that there is a tremendous amount of research being done into these areas, and there's some speculation. So I'll let you know kind of what people think, or what avenues that they are pursuing in terms of research. So, one is that women tend to live longer, and maybe they're living long enough to develop dementia. So that's one thought. Another key factor is that women tend to experience more conditions like heart disease, heart attacks and heart disease. And there is the type of dementia called vascular dementia, where it is closely related to heart disease. So those that have had heart attacks, stroke, or diabetes are at a greater risk. And so it could be that we're seeing more cases in women because of that, because of the heart conditions. Another thought is that, and I'm going to be very careful about how I say this, but the thought is that women have been the traditional nurturers and problem solvers in their families. A lot of the time, women are trying to problem solve. They're taking the stresses and strains in life or family situations on these very, very strong shoulders. But we do know that long-term stress and depression can often lead to an increased risk of dementia later in life. So it could be part of that. And then the final explanation is an area of research that they're looking at right now is hormonal changes in women. As women continue to age, how does estrogen play a role in increasing that risk, or does it play a role in increasing that? So those are areas that are being examined. I always say, stay tuned, because we have some amazing researchers right here in Canada that are looking at these different areas so that we can understand this disease more fully. Number 7, is Alzheimer's disease hereditary? Oh yeah, this is a question that we get asked all the time. Is it genetic? Is it genetic? Will, because my mother had Alzheimer's disease, or my aunt, does that mean automatically that I'm going to get it? So I wonder what you would answer to this question. Maybe you've heard of those cases where, it is related to genetics. But let's look at our answer here. So what I didn't tell you at the very beginning when we looked at the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's disease was that there's actually two different types of Alzheimer's disease. We have what we call familial Alzheimer's disease, where there is that genetic link, that genetic component, where it can be inherited. So the offspring can inherit that gene from a parent. And then the other type is what we call sporadic Alzheimer's disease. And these types are related to, possible lifestyle factors, different risk factors that could predispose somebody to developing Alzheimer's disease. So yes, it can be hereditary, but what is key to note from this slide and these diagrams is that the familial type of Alzheimer's disease accounts for about 1% of all Alzheimer cases. And that's the type that runs in families. So only 1%. Years ago, it was thought it was somewhere around 7%. And then with more research, it came down to about 5%. And now we're down to 1% because they are finding that there's far more cases that are related to the sporadic type. So they're looking at a whole host of lifestyle and risk factors that could indicate that increased risk for developing these. So I'm here to tell you that just because you may have it in your family, it does not mean automatically that you're going to go on and develop it. Hope that puts your mind at ease a little bit. Okay, we're in the home stretch now with our questions. We've got a couple more. Is dementia a normal part of growing old? Or in other words, is dementia a normal part of aging? What do you think about that question? A lot of people say to me, well, you see dementia a lot in seniors, so maybe it is a normal part of growing older. Well, I'm here to tell you that no, it is not a normal part of aging. And we really need to have a good understanding that just because we're aging doesn't mean that we're going to actually go on to develop dementia. And I wanted to show you these different slides of the actual structures in the disease process so there's Alzheimer's cells there's Pick's bodies that are existing in frontotemporal dementia and Lewy bodies in Lewy body dementia. And those are, the dementia is caused by certain diseases or disorders in the brain, and they're not just an inevitable part of aging. So there's those conditions that do exist there that are causing the symptoms and the brain changes as well. Number 9, does Alzheimer's disease affect people younger than 65? We say age 65 because most people define seniors as being 65 and older. So what do you think? Can people under the age of 65 develop Alzheimer's disease? Well, while we do see a lot of seniors, far more people over the age of 65 that have dementia, I want to be very careful and to be very clear in saying that Alzheimer's disease can occur in people who are younger than 65. It can happen to people in their 50s, their 40s, and even their 30s. And generally, when we refer to this type of dementia, we refer to it as young onset dementia. So it happens before the age of what they refer to as late or normal onset Alzheimer's disease, and that's 65 and older. So, it's not unusual now to see individuals experiencing those symptoms. And, we also encourage people that if they're seeing symptoms and they are a bit younger, not to discount that as saying, well, it can't be Alzheimer's disease because I'm not a senior. No, we need to understand that, yes, in fact, it can affect people that are younger. And so it's always important to share any symptoms that you or a loved one may be experiencing with the healthcare provider so that, an accurate diagnosis or treatment can be made. And our very last question, is Alzheimer's disease preventable? Yeah, this is a big question, and one that you may be wondering, is it something that we can prevent? Can we stop it from happening to us? And I tell you, I wish I could say definitively, yes, that there are things that we can do to prevent it. But because there is no known cause for Alzheimer's disease at this time, even though researchers are working really hard to discover what the cause is, um, there's no conclusive evidence that Alzheimer's disease can be prevented. We need to be able to know what causes it before we can determine what could cure it or what could appropriately treat it. But I want to send the message that there are things that you can do to lower your risk because the research does tell us that there's certain key lifestyle factors that can increase your risk of developing it. So some of them are listed here on the slide, but we do have healthy brain education that we provide a lot. And we talk about the importance of, reducing stress because we know stress can be a factor. Um, about remaining social, socially interactive with others. That's key for brain health. Eating healthy for your brain. And we often hear about eating, you know, healthy for your heart, but we also need to make sure that we are taking in foods that will benefit our brain health. We need to keep our brain challenged and active by learning new things and people say our crossword puzzles and reading and all of those things, are they important for your brain as we age? And yes, they are. So giving your brain a new experience every day is key. And don't forget the importance of physical activity and exercise as well, because that can promote good brain health. Protecting your head, making sure that we're not receiving any head injuries. That's important as well. So there are things that we can do to reduce that risk. So we have reached the end of our quiz, and let's check in and see how you did. If you were keeping track, how did you score out of 10? Did you surprise yourself with what you already know about dementia? I certainly hope that, by addressing some of the most common questions that we receive about dementia and about Alzheimer's disease, that it has really helped to enhance your knowledge and understanding today. And I hope you did a really good job scoring yourself there. And I would just like to thank you for your participation in this education session. If you have any questions or if you would like to find out more about resources that are available to support you, please reach out to me by using the contact information there on your screen. My contact information and telephone number and our website is up there, and you can feel free to reach out to me at any time. I'd be happy to help support you. And I would like to thank you once again for your kind participation, and to the Senior Showcase for inviting me to speak in this presentation today. So thank you very much.